that my students thought that this was a Bible. Which, I mean, to be fair, it looks exactly like a Bible, and it has a cross on the front. So why would you not think that it's a Bible? But I said, no, it's the Book of Common Prayer. To which they were like, oh, what's that? This is a copy that has the hymnal in the back. So a BCP and hymnal combo.
They also make a Book of Common Prayer and New Revised Standard Version Bible combo.
They do. Unfortunately, I don't recommend it because it's very compact.
Yes.
And so they printed the Book of Common Prayer in 8-point font, and then the Bible is in 6-point. So if you have powerful glasses or a magnifying glass, it might work for you. But otherwise, I really wish, maybe now that we have a new translation of the Bible that we're using, I think we mentioned this last week, the NRSV UE updated edition. It certainly would be nice if you could get both of those smushed together. Yeah. So yeah, we'll talk about that. The Book of Common Prayer, incidentally, is actually in the public domain.
So it's freely available.
It's freely available online, the text, which is, of course, how and why we're able to produce the bulletin each week. Because we don't have to ask permission, we just reproduce the text, and the hymns we have to get copyright and legal permissions to use. But then the text of the Book of Common Prayer itself is just in the public domain. So we don't have to worry about that. So in theory, you could produce your own copy of the BCP if you wanted to. If you had access to a bookbinder or you wanted to make your own special edition online. And in fact, in my office is a newer copy of the BCP by a different publisher, Forward Movement. And they wanted to make a really nice version of it, and they wanted to put the rubrics in red. And so they could do that. They didn't have to get special permission. They just published the edition. We'll get there as well, yeah. But that's the one, in fact, that I recommend to people now, is the one that is published by Forward Movement, the Book of Common Prayer, yeah. And it's a nice size, and this is an urban legend that I heard during seminary, but apparently at one point, Church Publishing, which is our publishing arm of the Episcopal Church, lost the computer files to the Book of Common Prayer. And so then they had to reset it. And if you get a more recent copy of the BCP, it looks really bad because they didn't do a very good job when they reset it. So in terms of the typography and the kerning and all of that sort of stuff, they didn't do a great job. So anyway, that's why, again, I recommend if someone's buying the BCP from scratch, that they go with the Forward Movement edition of the Book of Common Prayer. It's the best one in print. So, all right, well, welcome. Let's begin. So do you all have a red book that looks like this? That's what we're going to do. We're going to sort of march through the Book of Common Prayer today. We have talked about its history some in this class, so just a very brief review. The first edition ever was published in 1549. Largely written by one person, Thomas Cranmer, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the first sort of Anglican theologian and liturgist in our tradition. There's been different editions over the years. The 1662 book is the one that's still used in England to this day. It's their official Book of Common Prayer. The American version started in 1789, which makes sense. That's when we ratified the Constitution and we were a new nation. It's been through 4 different iterations. So there was an 1892, a 1928, which Dave has a copy of. Yeah. And then a 1979. And yes, go ahead.
Curious about
yes.
Thomas Cranmer wrote,
yeah.
and you have that
Yeah, we talked about some of this a couple of weeks ago when we said that Cranmer wanted a language understanded of the people, right? So he wanted our liturgies to be in a language that everybody understood, which is why we continue to revise it, because that's our principle, right? We want worship to be understandable to people. And it's just like when I talked about in my sermon today, some of the translations of the 23rd Psalm. You know, we've lost the sense of the meaning of some of those older expressions, and sometimes it confuses people, you know? So it's important to keep updating our translations. So you can start at the main page, the Book of Common Prayer, and administration of the sacraments, and other rites, and ceremonies of the church, together with the Psalter or Psalms of David. So that's an abbreviated version of the full title of the original one, which was even longer. But what that does, if you just flip the page, and if you're on the table of contents page that looks like this, I feel like I'm back in story time. Yeah, looks like this, okay. You can see that basically what we have here is a collection, it's a library. That's what the Book of Common Prayer is. It's a library of about 5 or 6 different books. And in the Middle Ages, before the Book of Common Prayer, they were all separate volumes, and they lived, of course, only in the church or in the monastery, and they were all in Latin. And so besides translating the scriptures and the liturgies into English, the other thing Thomas Cranmer did is to take those 6 to 8 books and cram them all into one book that you would have from cover to cover, everything that you need to be, in his mind, a faithful Anglican, you know, someone who's going to do all the things. So I want to go through the table of contents itself and explain a few things, and then we'll kind of jump around from section to section. The first thing is the calendar of the church year. And so all the books of Common Prayer always start with the calendar of the church year. You can go ahead and flip over there if you want to. You can keep your finger in the table of contents. And this is what tells us, especially as the clergy, how to run church. Right? How should you be running church? So, in fact, the bishops themselves are also subject to the Book of Common Prayer. So a bishop can't tell us to worship in a way that's not already approved in the Book of Common Prayer unless they have expressed permission from General Convention to do so. So this really is our sort of final authority. And one of the vows that I took as a priest was to abide by the Book of Common Prayer. And so this is what tells me how to run church from Sunday to Sunday. We have principal feasts. We have all the Sundays, the holy days, days of special devotion and observance, and then you literally have a calendar starting on page 19. Everything in bold is a major feast of the church. Sometimes these happen during the week and we don't observe them, but you have all of these saints' days for the most part. Now, it's interesting, right, on page 25, and this has become controversial in recent years, but because we are a national church, Independence Day is a major feast in the Episcopal Church. And so some churches have a complete separate service on Independence Day, on July the 4th. So that's the only thing besides Thanksgiving that kind of stands out as well. And Thanksgiving isn't even listed in the calendar, but it is also an optional observance as well.
It's listed, but it's not in the month-by-month calendar.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you. Yes, because it moves around. It's a movable feast. Yeah. So again, some feasts are fixed and some are movable. And that largely just has to do with tradition and history, right? So obviously December 25th is Christmas Day, right? And it is an immovable feast. It's always December 25th. Easter is a movable feast because Easter is based on Passover, and Passover is based on the lunar calendar. So Easter always happens on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal Equinox. Solstice. Equinox. It's an equinox. Yeah. Okay. So that's why it changes from year to year, because it's based on the lunar calendar. And so then we get the date of Easter first, and then we backdate so that we can get Ash Wednesday. We just count backward, literally, until we get back 40 days plus the Sundays of Lent, and that gets us back to fix the day of Ash Wednesday. So all of Lent, Ash Wednesday, Easter, right, that changes every year. And so then that also changes when Pentecost happens, because it's 50 days after Easter. And so then that changes how many Sundays there are between Pentecost and the next major change in the church calendar, which is Advent. And so we're going to have a different number of Sundays every single year between Pentecost, which is sometimes late May, sometimes early June, and the beginning of Advent, sometimes November, sometimes December.
Right, because Advent as well, or even though Christmas is a fixed date, we do Sundays of Advent. So that means that, the number of Sundays is always 4.
Yeah.
But when those start vary.
Yeah. So, and there are conversations, I don't know if this will come to fruition, but to fix the date for Easter. And these are conversations that have to happen with the Orthodox and the Catholics, and then all the other churches as well. The Orthodox calendar is different than the Western calendar. And so if you have Orthodox friends, they celebrate Easter usually about a week after we do, because they're on the Julian calendar, not the Gregorian calendar. So, crazy stuff. But that's why not everybody always celebrates Easter on the same day in the church.
One other comment about the calendar is that, the saints' days that you see listed there, first off, there's a separate book. We do have a few separate books, but there's a separate book called Lesser Feast and Fast. I never know about the fast part because they're all really feast, but they have what we would call the propers, which would be the readings and the prayers that we would use for those individual saints' days. And the saints' days, like for example, the calendar that's in the prayer book you have most likely, is probably not exactly the same as the current listing of saints' days that we have in the calendar, because those change. People get added for different reasons, and like most things in the Episcopal Church, it's a very democratic process in terms of how that occurs. Unlike the Catholic Church, where saints have to perform a certain number of miracles, and it gets determined by the Pope and so forth. Here, General Convention decides as to who gets put on our calendar. So, we've had additions over time.
Yes, and I'm not texting while David is talking. I'm pulling up, so this has been of great controversy over the last 15 to 20 years in the Episcopal Church, because we now have like 3 different books, and it's confusing to know which one, because anyway, it's because we want to be generous in who is called a saint in the Episcopal Church, as David said, right? It's not like 3 posthumous miracles and an investigation by the Vatican. It's people in a room, saying, this person did a lot of good stuff, let's canonize them. And then General Convention has to vote to approve on it. But if you look through the list of saints in the Episcopal Church, Johann Sebastian Bach has a day. I'm going to name some random people that you might not think were Episcopal saints. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you might expect, but there's some sort of more obscure Episcopal figures who are named as well. Even John Calvin is a saint. G.K. Chesterton. So authors, musicians. One of our most famous saints is Jonathan Daniels, August 14th. And he's a civil rights martyr. So Jonathan Daniels was a seminarian at one of our defunct seminaries in the Northeast, and he had gone down to help folks register to vote in Alabama, and a sheriff threatened a young African-American woman with a shotgun, and Jonathan Daniels stepped right in front of the blast and was killed. Saved that woman's life. That woman's name is Ruby Sales, and she is still very active in the civil rights movement to this day. So we have folks like that represented in our church calendar as well. And what that means more or less is that if we wanted to, we can have a Eucharist every day of the year, as the Roman Catholics do. but we're not required to. So it's optional, but not required. So at my previous parish, for example, we would celebrate the feast of Jonathan Daniels, the martyr, and we would have speakers come in, outside speakers, and we would kind of reflect on the state of the civil rights movement today in our church. So often then churches will also make a big deal of their patronal feast. So if they are named after a particular saint, whenever that saint's day comes up in the calendar, time to throw a big party. Again, my previous parish was St. Albans. Alban was the first English saint, and his feast day is in June, so we would throw a big thing outdoors in Texas in June, which was always miserable. But our patronal feast, obviously, is All Saints, right? So we make a big deal out of it because it's the name feast of our parish. And so some parishes that are called Good Shepherd, like Episcopal Church of the Good Shepherd, they might have chosen today to be their patronal feast because obviously it's Good Shepherd Sunday. So that's a little bit about the church calendar. The next book then that is enclosed in the Book of Common Prayer is what we call a breviary. B-R-E-V-I-A-R-Y, breviary. And so again, in the medieval church, that would have been what were called the daily offices for monks to pray every single day. And what Thomas Cranmer wanted to give to the English church at the time of the Reformation was the ability to pray like the monks do, to pray throughout the day, to have these sort of fixed prayers that you would combine with scripture reading, and that you would pray throughout the day. He condensed, the monastic hours into basically 2 morning and evening prayer. And then over time, we, in the 79 prayer book, revived 2 of the little offices, noonday prayer and also Compline, the prayer before bed. So we'll come back and look at the office a little bit here in just a moment. The Great Litany on page 148, we typically reserve for, we usually do it the first Sunday of Lent. But it said, actually, let's flip over there if you don't mind to page 148. The Great Litany, by the way, was the first liturgy translated into English. So it's the first thing that Cranmer did when he started to translate the old Latin texts into English was the Great Litany. If you look at, it's really long, by the way, and we usually chant it. At least in my opinion, that's how it should be done. But the litany is usually also reserved for times of great turmoil in our national life or in the world. There's a section called the Supplication on page 154. If you flip over there, it says that this particular liturgy can be used especially in times of war or national anxiety or disaster. So that's called the supplication. Sometimes it's tagged on to the end of the Great Litany. Sometimes it just is a replacement for it. Yes, Kara?
Who determines when it's said? The bishop?
The priest. You mean when it's said?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, that's right. Now, occasionally, Kara, a bishop might say, we all need to be praying the Great Litany this Sunday because X happened, And so, obviously, I would do it. Because one of my other vows was to obey the bishop. In ordination. So, then we have the collects. So,
these Catholic?
yeah.
Or did he write these?
So the Great Litany is largely straight from the Catholic liturgy. There was very little that Cranmer changed. Yeah. And again, sorry, let's flip back there real quick to 148. You can see, it is praying that we be delivered from basically the things that are our fault and the things that aren't our fault. So if you think of sin and disaster, right, some of these things we bring on ourselves, and some of these things just happen, as the insurance people would say, they're acts of God, and so, but we're praying for to be rescued from blindness of heart, from pride, vainglory, and hypocrisy, from the deceits of the world, the flesh, and the devil, from false doctrine, heresy, and schism. So we're praying that the church would not continue to split, in other words, that we would be united under Christ. But then we're also praying for deliverance from the climate, lightning, tempest, earthquake, fire, and flood, plague, pestilence, and famine. You know, we used to think that that part of the Great Litany was a little quaint until climate change, right? More and more powerful and destructive storms, until COVID, when we started praying for deliverance from plague and pestilence once again, you know. From all oppression, conspiracy, and rebellion. So you can hear in that the original sort of English, you know, let's pray that nobody rebels against the king. You know, that was the hope, that was the prayer. From violence, battle, and murder, and from dying suddenly and unprepared. That's a bit countercultural now. You know, people say, oh, I want to go quickly, or I want to go suddenly, or I want to go in my sleep, you know. And the great prayer of the medieval church was, allow me to have a time of preparation for death. You know, allow me the chance to reflect on my life. Allow me the chance to pray and to be part of the religious community as I face death. Right? And so then it goes on and on and on. It's wonderful. I mean, I love it. I love it so much. On the bottom of 150, you can see this is obviously the American version. It please thee to rule the hearts of thy servants, the President of the United States, or of this nation, and all those in authority, that they may do justice and love mercy, and walk in the ways of truth, echoing Micah 4:6. That it may please thee to make wars to cease in all the world. Oh, it's so good, y'all. 151, the middle of the page, that it may please thee to inspire us in our several callings to do the work which thou givest us to do, with singleness of heart as thy servants, and for the common good. What a great, great petition right there as well. My other favorite one is on page 152. That it may please thee to strengthen such as do stand, to comfort and help the weak-hearted, to raise up those who fall, and finally to beat down Satan under our feet. I love that part. You know, kick the devil in the head. We're done with this. We're done with it. Okay. So that's the litany, and it's just printed separately because, again, it's a separate liturgy, and it can be used at any time of the year. The next thing that follows then are the collects. So the collects are those prayers that we pray at the beginning of every Eucharist, and they just move us throughout the entire Christian year. We have two sections. We have the traditional language collects. So if you look through those pages, you can see lots of dits and thines and thees and thous. And so then the prayers that are used in the contemporary, which starts on page 211. So that's the one, obviously, we use at the 10 o'clock a.m. service, at the Rite 2 service. And so, yeah, these are prayers mostly written by Thomas Cranmer, but there are prayers written by other folks over the last 400 years of this tradition. There is a book called The Commentary on the American Prayer Book, which is fantastic and unfortunately out of print. Sometimes I use, there's a copy on archive.org. If you ever go on archive.org, you can check out a copy for a couple of hours and you can flip through it. That's what I used to do before I had my own copy. But it actually provides you with the source of every single collect in the prayer book, which is really, so it's like, this is a Cranmer original. You know, this one was written by John Studdert Kennedy. This one was, you know, we don't know who wrote this one, or this one comes from the Galasian Sacramentary, you know, a 9th century liturgical text in Latin, and then it was translated into English by Cranmer. All that good stuff. Really, really hardcore nerd stuff, church nerd stuff. Yeah.
Collect is a weird name. Why is it called a collect?
Yeah. So you'll notice at the beginning, I'm trying to get better about this. Of course, what they tell you in seminary is when you introduce the collect as the priest, say, let us pray. And then you should have a good 15 seconds of silence so that people can start praying in their hearts. And then the collect is collecting all the prayers. Yeah. So now we're collecting all the silent prayers that people have been praying, and we're sort of laser focused then, you know, like through a prism, right? We collect all the prayers, and then they blossom out into this one prayer that changes every week depending on the liturgical season and the scriptural emphasis. So it's a really cool thing. I'm trying to get that silence a little bit longer. People, I'll have to explain it one day, because I think if I didn't, people would just think that something was wrong with me. It's like, why isn't he saying
And
anything?
you probably share too that, the collects, they're not just sort of random. There's a form to them in terms of how they are all arranged.
Yeah. We'll do a collect writing workshop sometime. I did this once with Patrick Otuma, the Irish poet, and it was life-changing. It's so cool. So he talked about the 5 parts of the collect, and then we wrote our own. So we'll keep that in mind. But that's the collects. So they go through the church year, and then there's collects for various occasions as well. So then if you'll flip to page 264, this is when the next major section begins. And in the introduction, in the table of contents, this is called Proper Liturgies for Special Days. Anybody take French? Any French speakers in the house? A couple? Okay, so French has this adjective propre, P-R-O-P-R-E. It means belonging to or appropriate for, and that is the Latin root of this word that we translate in English here, proper. So do not think that these are like proper liturgies, right? Like they're only suitable for people who are quite proper. Proper here means the right liturgy on the right day. That's all it means. So these are proper liturgies, meaning they are special, they're unique. They're liturgies that don't show up at any other time. So, I mean, you can pick any Sunday in the calendar, right? And you can say, more or less, the liturgy is going to be the same. There's all these movable parts you plug and play, but you could come up with the service for a Sunday on your own using the Book of Common Prayer. You could do that. There's tables, there's charts, there's ways to figure all of that out. There's instructions, etc. The proper liturgies, though, only happen on that specific day. And so these are largely Holy Week, and Ash Wednesday is the first one because it's a unique liturgy. There's nothing else like it. Then the Sunday of the Passion, Palm Sunday. Then Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and the Great Vigil of Easter. Some of these were not observed in the Episcopal Church until the 1979 prayer book. So the Great Vigil of Easter, for example, for many, many years, it was considered a Catholic thing that Anglicans didn't do. But then I'm so glad they put it back in the liturgy. It's many of our favorite service of the year, and so the Great Vigil Mass happens now in Episcopal churches. It is optional, though. You don't have to offer the Great Vigil of Easter. It is a bit of a production, There's fire, there's chanting, there's a lot of extra stuff, but it's a great service. And the only stipulation is that it has to happen between sundown on Holy Saturday and sunup on Easter morning. So I've been at a parish that started at 6 a.m. on Sunday morning and made it into the sunrise service. Or in a lot of places, it'll just be a liturgy that happens around 8 or 9 in the evening once the sun goes down. It's Easter. So we have to remember in the church calendar that we follow actually the Jewish practice of beginning the day at sunset. So that's why Christmas Eve, it's not the day before Christmas, it's actually the beginning of Christmas Day. Because there's evening and there's morning. If you know Genesis 1, when God's creating the world, it says, and there was evening and there was morning the first day. So that's where that comes from, the Jewish idea that the day actually begins at sunset. So there was evening and there was morning. So All Saints, All Hallows Eve, right? That's the beginning of All Saints Day. Boom. The evening and the morning. I guess technically then the day ends at sundown on November 1st, right? Yeah. Okay, the next major section then is called Holy Baptism, right? And so this is, again, a liturgy that is used only for certain days of the church year. All of these sections, this is a good opportunity to point this out. If you look at page 312, many of these sections have additional directions. So like they'll have the liturgy, and then these are church nerd notes, or these are notes for clergy who are doing these services in particular. They give us all the different options and the reasons. But notice what it says on Holy Baptism on page 312. Holy Baptism is especially appropriate at the Easter Vigil, Pentecost, All Saints' Day, and the Feast of the Baptism of our Lord. It is recommended that as far as possible, baptisms be reserved for these occasions. So that's why we typically, quote-unquote, offer baptism 4 Sundays out of the year. Or it says when a bishop is present. So you can do that as well.
And you notice those 4 Sundays, they're sort of quarterly in a way.
Yes.
Because, the baptism of our Lord, that's January, and then Easter Vigil is obviously springtime, and then we have Pentecost in early summer, and then in fall we have All Saints' Day. So
Yeah.
it does work out pretty well that way too.
It does, yeah. If someone is just burning, to be baptized, though, I don't say you have to wait. Let's go ahead and do it. Yeah. Okay. So that gives you all the liturgy for Holy Baptism. Notice as well on page 313, these are sort of the extra nuggets of gold that are buried in the Book of Common Prayer. So conditional baptism. So someone is like, and this has happened before to me, they're like, well, I think I was baptized, but I don't know. It was 65 years ago, I'm not sure. So then you can do a conditional baptism. And you just say, if you were not already baptized, now you're being baptized, Or an emergency baptism. Any baptized person may administer baptism according to the following form. So we do believe in the Episcopal Church and what we call the priesthood of all believers. So even though we do have a formal clergy, obviously, and we have a priesthood, we also believe that baptism could be administered conditionally. Not the Eucharist, incidentally, but baptism, yes.
So, if there was somebody who, near death,
Yeah.
wants to be baptized, and that's, this is an option for that.
Yes.
But it does note in there, too, that if it does occur, then the priest of the parish is supposed to be informed as soon as possible.
Yes. And then to let the
so
bishop
let them
know.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Okay, y'all still with me? Good? Yes, go ahead.
Anyone can baptize in case we're like a
Correct.
I'm standing on the street.
Yes.
Yeah, any
Yes.
baptized Christian can baptize another.
Yes.
In the dragon way.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. Those are our only 2 requirements for baptism in the Episcopal Church, that it's done with water and that it's done in the name of the Holy Trinity. Yeah. Yeah. And this becomes, it has been an issue in the past when, for example, I've spoken with someone who was part of the LDS, the Latter-day Saints, Mormon. They're sort of baptized in the name of Holy Trinity, but not really. And so the Roman Catholic Church actually adds a 3rd requirement to baptism, that it be done with a specific intent. And so the argument there would be that the Mormon baptism is not done with the intent of baptizing in the Holy Trinity as we Nicene Catholic Christians understand it. And so we ended up doing a conditional baptism for that person. Yeah.
In Catholic school, we were taught emergency baptism, the way they teach CPR today.
Yeah.
The whole thing, we had to practice on each other in case we
Oh,
were...
that's great. Yes. I love it. It's funny, as you all know, I grew up Baptist, and so my brother and I used to baptize each other in the swimming pool. For fun, right? Just dunk each other under the water. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
and I growing up Catholic, we used to play Mass, right? And make
Yeah.
our own communion wafers and do that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's what you get exposed to, right?
Exactly.
And then you live to tell about it.
Right? So the next major section is the Holy Eucharist. And so this is, as you see there, the liturgy for the proclamation of the Word of God and celebration of Holy Communion. So Eucharist is made up of 2 halves. you have the proclamation of the word, and then you have the halftime show, which is peace. The announcements usually come at the halftime. They actually don't have to. We could do announcements before church. We could do them after church. And there's another weird spot. The BCP actually says when you can do announcements even. But most Episcopalians obviously do it at halftime. Yeah. When we have the peace. People are already moving around and talking and that sort of thing. And as you former Roman Catholics know, we do the peace at a different time. The Catholic Mass does it during the Eucharistic prayer itself. But I kind of like the way we break it up. That it just makes the break in the halves of the service more clean. Start at page 316 if you would, and I promise I'm not going to go through this entire thing. But the first whole section here is the Rite 1. Rite 1 is typically the 1662 rite. So again, if you don't know the word R-I-T-E, rite just means the liturgy or the order of service, the ritual. So the exhortation right here, this used to be read every single week. And it says basically, if you want to take communion next week when I'm going to offer it, you better be ready, right? It exhorts people to examine themselves, to make sure that they are in love and charity with their neighbors, all of this sort of thing, based on some of Paul's writings where he says one needs to examine oneself before receiving communion. Communion wasn't offered every Sunday, and often in the medieval and even into the Reformation, maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. So the priest would literally make an announcement in church. Next week, we're going to observe Holy Communion. And he would read this entire thing to get people ready. And then you have the Rite 1 service. So Holy Eucharist Rite 1 is, again, very similar. The prayers of the people are different, page 328. In the Rite 2, we have sort of movable prayers. You can write your own. They can change from season to season. In Rite 1, the prayers are the exact same every single week. And it's really cool what we do here. If you've never been to the 8 o'clock service, you can see that the prayers are divided into paragraphs, and so we just go from person to person. One person reads one paragraph, another person reads the next paragraph. We sort of do the prayers of the people in the round at the 8 o'clock service. The confession on page 331, you have two options here in Rite 1. The first one is, again, the more hardcore language that was used in the 1662. We acknowledge and bewail our manifold sins and wickedness, which we from time to time most grievously have committed, by thought, word, and deed against thy divine majesty, provoking most justly thy wrath and indignation against us. Yeah, it's beautiful language. It's beautiful language, but certainly it reflects a posture that many Episcopalians would not take, or rather not take, every week when we confess our sins against God and our neighbor. So then you also have the Rite 1-ified version of the more simplified confession there at the bottom of that page. And then go through, there's 2 Eucharistic prayers in the Rite 1 service. If you look on page 344, the proper prefaces, again, remembering what the word proper means, it means the one appropriate to that particular day or to season. And so there's a section in the Eucharistic prayer called the preface. And so that changes from season to season. So this is where you find all of those. And then we get to, on page 350, Rite 2. Yes, Jennifer? Correct. That's right. Yeah. Which page are you on, Jenny? 344. Yes. Yeah, so weekday Eucharists, again, are not really a big thing in the Episcopal Church. Again, unlike the Roman Catholic Church, where Mass is said every single day. And so I couldn't honestly tell you the reason why. I just know we're supposed to admit it. You're supposed to omit the proper preface and the Nicene Creed. So the Nicene Creed is only used on Sundays and major feasts. So again, if we did a Wednesday noon Eucharist, like many parishes do, for example, we wouldn't use the Nicene Creed at that service. Yeah.
You use the Apostles' Creed?
No. The Apostles' Creed is used only for baptismal services. That's the only time we use the Apostles' Creed in the Episcopal Church. Yeah. And at funerals. And at funerals. We use the Apostles' Creed instead of the Nicene Creed at funerals as well.
Now, there are proper prefaces for saints, for martyrs. So if that Wednesday theoretical Eucharist happened to be a feast day of a saint, even a lesser saint, and you chose to honor that saint during the service, then you would choose a proper preface.
That's true.
For a saint or
Yeah.
for a martyr.
Yeah.
That would be appropriate for that day.
But if you're doing just a normal Eucharist, then you wouldn't. Okay, if y'all would turn to page 354, this is where the main Rite 2 section begins. And I just want to point out this language to you. It says, "It is the bishop's prerogative when present to be the principal celebrant at the Lord's table and to preach the gospel." So, like, bishop is the default, and the priest is taking the place of the bishop, because the bishop can't be everywhere. So the bishop is the chief pastor of the diocese, and so the priests assist the bishop. We actually used this language when I was installed last fall. The bishop gave me, for example, the chrism oil and said, "I'm giving you the authority to baptize on my behalf." Right? So the bishop is the chief priest of the diocese, and then we individual priests obviously are in charge of our parishes, but we're doing so in place of the bishop. A deacon should read the gospel and may lead the prayers of the people. We don't have a deacon right now in our parish. We have in the past, and I'm sure at some point we will again. Deacon is an important office in the Episcopal Church. Unlike some of the free church traditions, like in the Baptist Church, where the congregation can just kind of get together and ordain people to the diaconate. In our tradition, the deacon has to go through a process of education and formation, and then to be formally ordained by a bishop. All priests must serve as deacons first, for a period of not less than 6 months. Sometimes it's a little longer, depending on just the way that the ordination calendar of that diocese runs. But I served as a deacon for 6 months until I was ordained as a priest. It's called the transitional diaconate, as opposed to the vocational diaconate. And so that's the deacon here. So the deacon has other tasks. Again, if we had one, they would prepare and place on the table. They would set the table. In fact, when I first started here, I hadn't set the table for over 3 years, because at my parish in Texas, we had a deacon. So I hadn't set the table in a long time. I had to remind myself how to do it. Yeah.
Deacons volunteer?
Deacons are volunteers. They're not compensated. And this is an ongoing conversation in the Episcopal Church. What that ends up meaning is that most of our deacons are quite elderly, because they do have to go through a process of formation. And so, if you think, well, I might become a deacon after retirement. So I might start discerning for the diaconate in my late 60s. And by the time I'm ordained, I'm probably 70. And deacons, unlike priests, priests have mandatory retirement at 72. That is, at least if they're going to be the rector of a parish. There's no mandatory retirement for deacons. And that has also put some of my friends who have very elderly deacons at times in very uncomfortable position, because they may have deacons that, in some cases, the congregation is just praying that they can make it through the gospel. So yeah, we've got some issues I think we need to address with the diaconate, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. It's just
The other thing about deacons
Yeah.
is that, deacons essentially report to the bishop. So, a parish may have a deacon, but typically the bishop is going to assign the deacon
Right.
to that parish. Now,
Right.
maybe with some input and some understanding of where they live and so forth.
yes.
But, it's different in that way.
It's very different, right? Because an associate priest, if I were to hire an associate, they would report to me. but the deacon would report to the bishop. Yeah, so it's an interesting, yeah. So let's look real quick. So go ahead. Yeah.
What was the diocese that All Saints is in, and who's the bishop?
Yeah, so we're in the Diocese of Michigan, which is only a tiny corner of the state.
Southeast.
The southeast corner. So it's Lansing. In fact, there's a parish in West Lansing that's actually in the other diocese. It's Lansing and East Lansing. It's Ann Arbor, and it's Detroit and suburbs. That's the Diocese of Michigan. Everywhere else on the Lower Peninsula is in the diocese. Now it's called the Diocese of the Great Lakes. The UP is the Diocese of Northern Michigan, except for the western part of the UP, which is in the Diocese of Wisconsin. Because you don't want a bishop to have to get all the way over there to Ironwood, right? I mean, that would, yeah. So the whole goal is that a bishop can get there within a day to where they need to be. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at Holy Eucharist Rite 2. So it's pretty straightforward. And again, we have some variation depending on the season of the church year. We use the Gloria for most of the year. During Lent, we typically use what's called the Kyrie eleison. Another good 80s song, by the way. Or the Trisagion, which is this Holy God, Holy and Mighty, Holy Immortal One. Then you have the Collect of the Day, and then you have the lessons. Then you have the sermon, the Nicene Creed, again on Sundays and other major feasts. Then the prayers of the people. And this is when it gets like a choose-your-own-adventure book. You gotta find the prayers of the people are later, so we'll come back to that. Then the confession of sin, then the peace. So 361 begins Holy Communion. We have 4 Eucharistic prayers that we use. So there's A and B. A and B are mostly traditional prayers. C, which starts on page 369, but really continues on page 370. It was clearly a product of the 1960s and 1970s. It's sometimes lightly ridiculed as the Star Wars prayer. If you look at even hymnody, though, from the 60s and 70s, much of the hymnody is about exploration of space. You know, because this was a revolutionary thing for humankind to engage in. And so we wanted to theologize about it, you know. We wanted to think about it from a theological perspective. So, God of all power, ruler of the universe, you are worthy of glory and praise. All right, it sounds a little bit Star Wars-y. At your command all things came to be, the vast expanse of interstellar space, galaxies, suns, the planets in their courses, and this fragile earth, our island home. Which I do love, that turn of phrase. This fragile earth, our island home. Again, think about the fact that we didn't see what the earth looked like until the 1950s. Right? So once we started getting pictures of it, we really realized just how tiny and insignificant we are in the cosmic realm. From the primal elements, you brought forth the human race. So this is alluding to evolution, the theory of evolution. You know, that we were brought forth from the primal elements, but we turned against it, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, this part of the Eucharistic prayer is always supposed to tell the story of salvation. So it tells the story of humanity. So it starts with creation, rebellion, and redemption. Right? That's how the pattern goes, because it's going to tell the whole story of salvation every time we gather for Eucharist. Then the one on page 372, Eucharistic Prayer D, is the longest one. I typically like to use it on High Holy Days, so on the Easter Vigil, All Saints' Day. This is from the liturgy of St. Basil, so it's an Eastern Orthodox prayer. And it's really lovely. There's a great chant to it as well. It's got a beat and you can dance to it. Page 375, it actually includes what we don't often do in the Episcopal Church, which is, we might call them votive prayers, so specific prayers for the dead, prayers for saints, all of that at the altar. And so that's something unusual doesn't appear in any of our other Eucharistic prayers. So then if you turn to page 376, you see the offertory sentences. And so you know that I use the same one every week. Walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and sacrifice to God.
Probably the most popular.
Probably the most popular, yeah. I could,
Somewhere else, you're liable to hear the same one.
yep. I could say any of these, though. Let us with gladness present the offerings and oblations of our life and labor to the Lord, etc. Okay. We're running out of time. So, if you'll go back to the table of contents and briefly, I'll just run through
Just before
several of
briefly,
these
just
things. Yeah.
To note, I mean, in addition to those 4 prayers, A, B, C, D, there are other Eucharistic prayers that the Church has authorized
Yes.
and that we do use
Yeah.
from time to time.
Yeah, I'm using one of those here in the Easter season from a supplementary text. So after Eucharist, then, you have the pastoral offices. So in essence, right, these are things that a priest has to do. So confirmation, which actually a bishop has to do. Celebration and blessing of marriage. The blessing of the civil marriage. So if someone gets married in the courthouse, they can still come into the church and have their marriage blessed by the priest. An order for marriage, thanksgiving for the birth or adoption of a child, which is a great service. That used to be called the churching of women. So, following the old Jewish tradition, where women were unclean after childbirth for 40 days, it was the practice in the Anglican Church where women didn't come to church for the first 40 days of the life of their child, and then they were churched, meaning they get to come back to church. So it was called the churching of women. Obviously, we've moved past that, but we still have a nice service that we can use for thanksgiving of birth or adoption. Then we have reconciliation, which is, again, the sacrament of confession. And we have, quote-unquote, last rites, so ministration to the sick and ministration at the time of death. And then we have the 2 burial rites, a rite 1 and a rite 2 as well. Then we have the Episcopal services. This is confusing, right? Because we are the Episcopal Church. But Episcopal is an adjective that means bishopy. So these are bishopy services. A bishop has to do these things. So ordination of a bishop, you got to have other bishops to ordain a bishop. Ordination of a priest and a deacon, you got to have a bishop to do that. The celebration of a new ministry, that's the installation service when you have a new rector. Or anything. When I was still a lay person and I was a school chaplain, we had a celebration of new ministry when I began my ministry at the school. And then the consecration of a church or chapel. Right? So you've done a building, and then you can consecrate that building with a bishop. And it's really cool, and you can sort of go all the way around, and there's prayers for all the different elements of the church. We have another book, the Book of Occasional Services. It has a home blessing. So a priest can go to a home and bless it, and sort of go to each room and have a separate prayer for it as well. Also in the Book of Occasional Services is prayers of deconsecration. So if a building was formerly used as a church and then it's being returned to any kind of secular use, then the bishop goes and deconsecrates that building and says, basically, we're letting the sacred sort of flow out here, right? And it's going to be used for whatever it's going to be used for again. Then you have the Psalter. You have prayers and thanksgivings. You have the Catechism, which we do have in the Episcopal Church. It's only about 20 pages, whereas the Roman Catholic Catechism is about 1,000. So I have a copy of it in my office. Then these historical documents that David alluded to earlier. So some things about older Anglican documents and the history of the Episcopal Church. A table for finding the date of Easter. Which is great. If you get bored during the sermon, you can go try to find the date of Easter for like 2062 or something.
Which today nowadays seems so archaic because well, you just whip your phone out and you just say, hey Siri, when is Easter in 2029?
Hey Siri, when will Easter be in the year 2172? Oh, it just brought up the list. Okay, well, Still, that's helpful. Okay, then you have the lectionary. And so the lectionary are all the tables that determine which scriptures are going to be read on which days. Again, 99.9% of priests, when they are putting together their bulletins, are not going, oh, let me see here. Okay. No, we just go to lectionarypage.net, which is the work of one individual, and I hope they never ever die. And they put the calendar on there. You click on the next Sunday, and all the readings are right there. And so you can pull them into your bulletin, and that's what we do every week. So we don't actually use the paper lectionary at all. It also includes the daily office lectionary. So if you wanted to pray the office every single day of the year, you could use this lectionary table. Or again, now there are so many different apps and ways of engaging with that material online, they'll just pull that up for you automatically. The Book of Common Prayer in 60 minutes. We have 2 minutes left. Any questions? Things you might want to talk about at some future point as well. Yes, Kate?
What would you say were the primary changes that they made in the 70s to the Book of Common Prayer?
Yeah, the primary changes they made in the 70s, they were pretty big. The main change is that we moved to having Eucharist every single week. So we moved from morning prayer being the normative service to Eucharist being the normative service. That was a pretty big shift in culture. Ethan?
What would require, it's 70s the last time this happened.
Yeah.
What would require a new book?
A miracle.
A miracle.
Because we've been talking about it, because there are strong and diverse opinions in our governing body, which is called General Convention, about that. So what is happening currently and what is likely to continue is that as we develop new liturgies, they have to be voted on twice by General Convention, which happens every 3 years, and then they can attain prayer book status, which means on our online resources, we'll say, this is a prayer book liturgy, meaning that I don't have to ask anybody, even the bishop, for permission to do it. I just do it. Currently, the new marriage liturgies that are intended for anyone, but especially for same-gender folks, they are still not prayer book status, but they will be next year at General Convention in 2027. They'll be voted on, they'll be approved, those will attain prayer book status. We're not going to print more books of common prayer ever, though, is my guess. Because that's not how the majority of us use the Book of Common Prayer anymore. As I said, most of us who are actually working in the church are pulling things from online. It's still great to have the paper book, you know, and I always encourage Episcopalians to have a copy of it, to have a copy of the Book of Common Prayer. But over time, liturgies will just be added into, and they'll attain that Book of Common Prayer status. And so there are liturgies right now that are in trial use that I have to ask the bishop permission to use. But then maybe one day they'll have prayer book status, and then I won't have to ask for permission anymore. I'll just use
And I think
them.
one of the other factors, like we've talked about here today, is that there are a number of things that are in the prayer book that are changeable. They change. So, for example,
Yeah.
we talked about the saints' days. Okay, well they may be added, or even the lectionary has been tweaked over time, or just things that are maybe sort of obsolete, like finding the date of Easter and so forth. So I
Yeah.
think that's part of the reason. It's like, okay, we print a brand new book. Are there parts of it then that are going to be out of date? And it's
I already have in my office a set of 5 books, thin books, called Enriching Our Worship, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so they have additional Eucharistic prayers. They have additional liturgies for the death of a child. There's a new service that was developed specifically for that pastoral situation. There's additional marriage liturgies. There's so they're just going to keep issuing those little books, but one of them's already out of print, and you just grab it online. So that's kind of where we are in terms of the Book of Common Prayer. but I don't envision us ever saying, here's the 2050 Book of Common Prayer. I don't think it's going to happen. Yeah.
But like you said, despite all that, I think it's worth
Yeah.
having a copy because
Yes.
it's a very rich resource.
We're around in 2049, we can celebrate the 500th anniversary of the first Book of Common Prayer. So that'll be right around retirement time for me. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. Yes, Jenny.
Lay people have a say in any changes in the prayer book, or is it all the clergy who
Lay people actually absolutely have a say. Yeah, because of the way that General Convention is structured. You know, we have a House of Bishops, we have a House of Deputies, which is made up of both lay and clergy. So.
Even beyond that, I mean, the committees that are, you know, they would have a standing committee on
liturgy and yeah.
And so that's made up of, there's lay people that serve on that.
Yeah.
In fact, I mean, I think, my brain just shut down, but who did the commentary on the prayer book?
Marian Hatchett.
Yeah, is he a
Yeah.
lay person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of lay people were involved in creating the 79 Book of Common Prayer. I would say probably it's more the product of lay people than it is of clergy. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all so much. We're out of time. Next week we'll wrap up. Okay. All right.